I have two designers on the brand team, and both of them are very, very talented coders. And so there is no longer this, arduous, lengthy process of building a website because the person who is designing it is building it, they're A/B testing it, and they're rebuilding it over the course of a week.
Khalid El Khatib, the Chief Marketing Officer of Stack Overflow. He definitely navigates the world of developers, something that David alluded to earlier today, as well as no-code enthusiasts. So people like myself who don't code but are kind of always on Stack Overflow. I usually have a tab on my browser open to do that. And he does this while also developing a brand that engages a community of over 100 million plus that comes to Stack Overflow every month. It's pretty big numbers. With a background as diverse as the developers he serves, Khalid fuses both the understanding of how developers function. They are a community pretty well known to be vibrant and notoriously opinionated, along with an uncanny ability to spot trends and brand opportunities. The profile of the developer is constantly evolving. Many of us over here are CEOs, we're brand builders, we're CMOs. What does that mean for us? How do we continue to work with this evolving profile?
Yeah, I think first of all, like speaking at a live event, it requires a level of agility. I think there are three things happening. One that we just heard about, which is digital transformation is happening at an incredible pace. And so banks, for example, are going through cloud migrations. Everyone is figuring out their AI strategy. Technology is becoming both more sophisticated and more pervasive. And so there are really two trends that we see and that we think a lot about. The first is the developer as a decision maker. And so like we just heard, decisions are no longer being made top down. Developers have incredible authority and opinions around which technology they want their companies to adopt. And so I think any technology company, and really any SaaS company, needs to market to developers to ensure that when it comes time to go through a procurement process, or if there is a very sophisticated RFP process, the developers evangelize your product. Slack has done this incredibly well relative to Microsoft Teams, for example, where a lot of companies will be huge Microsoft shops and still have a Slack instance because the developers refuse to use Microsoft Teams. So that's one. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. The other is what you spoke about most on the nose, and that's that everyone's becoming a developer to some extent. And so, for a number of years, I represented TED. And whenever I would wear like a TED t-shirt or have a tote on the subway, people would say, "Oh my God, do you work at TED?" And I thought I would never represent a brand that had that level of enthusiasm. And then I started working at Stack Overflow, and every time I wear a Stack Overflow t-shirt, whether it's to the gym or on the subway, someone will come up to me and say, "I graduated college because of you," or like, "I got unstuck at work today because of you." And that's not me being a marketer, saying that. It's true. And that is happening more and more, not because the site is becoming more and more popular, it's because more and more people are coding in some capacity. And so the analogy that I always sort of cite here is the graphic designer. When I started working in advertising 10, 15 years ago, we had designers who would build wireframes, they would build mock-ups, they would hand it off to the developers, and there would be this incredible back and forth. Today on my team, I have two designers on the brand team, and both of them are very, very talented coders. And so there is no longer this, arduous, lengthy process of building a website because the person who is designing it is building it, they're A/B testing it, and they're rebuilding it over the course of a week. And that's just one small example. There are investment bankers who are now using R, no longer relying on data scientists to do their models. Everyone is learning Python in some capacity. I know it's a popular course here. And so brands and marketers need to start thinking about what does that mean for their persona, for their ICP, and does their marketing need to be more technically savvy as well?
Yeah, great points, right? A lot of what you're talking about, again, very similar to what David alluded to, is building capabilities within an organization so that you're also not only serving the developers in your organization, you're also in some ways a beacon to those outside of your organization. Being at Stack Overflow, the kinds of challenges that you may have faced while you were looking at this expansion, this growing expansion of developers, must have been pretty interesting. I'm sure you have stories to share. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the kinds of challenges you faced, possibly, again, stories, and what was on the other side of those challenges.
Yeah, I think anyone who, we talk often about community being a competitive moat. So one of the reasons that Stack Overflow has been so successful since its launch in 2008 is that we have a very vibrant community of, as you said, about 100 million people who visit our websites every single month. And that is a double-edged sword. And I think lots of brands like Twitter, Reddit, and others have learned that. Oftentimes, the most engaged members of your community can be your most vocal critics. And sometimes their strong opinions or their criticisms of you can be antithetical to how you see growth. And so what I think we've learned the hard way at times is that you have to bring everyone along, but you have to be strategic and very thoughtful about how you do it. You certainly can't force decisions top down. And I think that, what we've sort of come to learn is that, through various strategies, you can engage your most sort of vocal critics and community members very early on, and then you can take sort of what you learn from that and apply it more broadly to the community. That's one, and then the other is you always have to think about growth. So I started my career at Teach for America many, many years ago, and I think one thing that they did that was so powerful is Wendy Kopp, when she launched the organization, really, really emphasized becoming an enduring institution. And so though folks were only teaching for 2 years in schools, she, through various programmatic methods, was empowering people to really change the system through policy, by becoming school administrators, et cetera. And so one thing that I've tried to do in my tenure as CMO at Stack Overflow is look to underrepresented populations of developers, whether that's young coders, whether that's developers in places like Africa and India. And I think that anyone who is building a community or marketing to a community needs to think about what that community might look like in 1, 5, 10, 50 years.
That's fantastic. I think the concept of community as a moat, both, thinking of it as a double-edged sword, is what sort of gives you the leverage to sort of look ahead, see what kinds of changes you can make. You made a really important point. You talked about how culture at scale, to again, borrow from the earlier session, is so critical because you're really bringing everyone with you, and that's so important. I want to take that and shift gears a little bit. You've been CMO at Stack Overflow since 2018. Since the time that you've been there, how has your role in the C-suite evolved? You've talked about how you're talking about being a culture bearer at this point. We all know that marketing is no longer about brand identity or just the colors and so on. It's really hardcore analytics. It's really about doing the numbers, very similar to what folks in the finance div may be doing. So when you are a CMO or when you are a marketing leader, how do you see your role, especially evolving in the larger context of a company?
That's a robust question. I think I'll take it a few ways. So first of all, I've been at the company for 5 years. It'll be 5 years in June. So I've navigated incredible change. I'm 3 CEOs, so 2 CEO transitions, Series E, $2 billion acquisition, and I'm the only member of the leadership team to have stuck around through all of that. So just by being tenured, there is some weird stuff there. On top of that, I think there are a couple of things. So I think every marketer brings something different to the table. I'll often speak to a VC who is like, "Hey, I have this CEO who's trying to hire a CMO. Can you talk to him or her?" And I'll talk to them and I'll be like, "Oof, they need a director of marketing operations, or they need a VP of demand generation, or they need a VP of comms." I think you often find that in very when there was this massive capital injection a couple of years ago, a lot of these Series A and B companies would hire the CMO who they really didn't need. And today, I think any CMO who says that they're full stack and they can do it all is lying. So I rely a lot on my team. I think the strength that I bring is that I'm a pretty strong communicator, especially when it comes to writing. So actually, many, many years ago, in like 2010, I applied to get my MFA at Columbia and elected not to go to keep working. But I did keep writing. And so I've written for a number of magazines. I write a lot within the company. And I think that the sort of elevation of communication skills over the past few years in particular, through COVID, through Black Lives Matter, through burnout, has been a real game changer for the role of the CMO. And so, I always talk about how internal communications practices were regulated to, a single person within a people team for many years. They were responsible for the company's intranet, celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, what have you. And now this is a very complex, nuanced job, and it can make or break CEOs and whole companies. And so I think the role of the CEO is more important to the CEO than ever. It's more important to the HR function than ever. And then in an economic environment like this that will likely persist for some time, it's imperative that the CMO also has a great deal of financial acumen, data acumen, as you stated, and with the sort of acceleration of AI and ML and everything else, that they're pretty sophisticated when it comes to product. And so, CMOs used to churn out every couple of years. They would sometimes be regulated to the back room. And now I think CMOs have the seat at the table at companies that are smart and sophisticated and set up to succeed.
I loved how you interweaved your story here as well, right? So there are a lot of people here who are thinking about how to build a career as a brand builder. What kinds of insights do you have for them, especially if they come from a somewhat non-traditional background, as you did?
It's a good question. My advice changes every day because the world is changing so quickly. I think, the one thing that I'm super committed to is staying very curious and learning as much as possible. And so, I took the subway here, like many of you, for an hour and usually 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes today, and I read 14 newsletters. That's, I start my morning by reading my newsletters, doing my Wordle. And I like to really internalize what other companies are doing well and not so well, and take that into my day-to-day. And I think that the best marketers that I know can sort of cite, as if they're case studies, examples of how brands have failed. They have their finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I think that I've always sort of brought that to the table. I've always been very online. And I think that is an important skill to have when the world is moving as quickly as it is. I think the other thing about being a marketer is bringing humanity to the role. I think that there is an expectation. There are some very good, highly introverted marketing leaders, but there is an expectation that a marketing leader is often something of a people person or a strong people manager, and willing and able to speak at a conference such as this, for example. So I think investing in those skills and communication skills is really paramount as well.
Yeah, and I have to say, being an introvert is not necessarily mutually exclusive from being a people leader, right? Something that we all know. Yeah. I love the 2 points that you brought up, especially as someone who builds leadership development programs. Curiosity and humanity, they're so apt for pretty much anything that we do. Speaking of curiosity, in the light of emerging technologies, this is possibly the 3rd time we're bringing up ChatGPT, and we're pretty young in the day. How is Stack Overflow adapting to this new dynamic landscape? How can folks who are currently who are no-code enthusiasts, possibly designers in the audience, how can they take advantage of this as individuals to continue to grow in this very developer-centric world?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. So first of all, I think there's finally consensus that this is in fact a paradigm shift. IBM has been talking about AI for many, many years, and though people weren't disagreeing that it was a transformative technology, I don't think very many people would agree that it was here, that it was changing things today. That has changed very, very rapidly since December. I think the other, taking that into consideration, the other point worth mentioning is that we are very, very early stages. There are all these debates on whether ChatGPT will replace doctors and journalists and marketers. That will be figured out later. I'm confident that no one on my team is going to lose their job to ChatGPT today. And hopefully that's true. But I think now is the time to start experimenting, to understand which tasks you can start offloading to Gen AI, broadly speaking. and how you can use it in core principles of marketing that have existed for a long, long time. So A/B testing, for example. Maybe you can offload a $70,000 tool that was A/B testing your website or your copy or your tweets because there is some AI tool that can do it much more effectively and much cheaper. So I think there are lots of use cases. I think the other thing that's worth considering is that every product and every company is very different. And so, if you're a B2C brand that is very straightforward, for example, there are probably more applications of AI that you can use today than if you're a very technical SaaS company, for example. And I think you have to be really careful there. We've seen a number of companies that have leaned too hard into AI too early on, and it's backfired.
Yeah, definitely. That top-down approach doesn't always work. Yeah. I want to wrap it up with the final question. We all live in a very real world where we have current affairs, the war in Ukraine, the Black Lives Matter movement, the fact that we're all here in a post-pandemic new normal. How do we take that reality as marketers and bridge the gap with the organizations that we work at so that we can strategically continue to be relevant to the people, to the audience that we continue to serve and want to serve?
That's a really hard question to answer. I think I think I can answer it in two ways. So first is me as a person. I go back and forth all the time. I did like 3 podcasts last week, which is unusual for me. I'm not one of those marketers who's like always on podcasts. But at the end, they were like, "And where can we follow you on Twitter?" And I was like, "Oh gosh," because my Twitter is so embarrassing. I never tweet. I'm not like hashtagging innovation. I'm tweeting really embarrassing things that have nothing to do with work. And over time, thanks to a couple of viral tweets, my company started following me. And I struggled, and I sort of oscillated between, is this okay, and is this not okay? And I came out on the other side, thanks in large part to some of what you just mentioned, the pandemic, a lot of things that happened around racial equity, and there's always been this conversation about bringing your full self to work. And it was like, you know what? I'm a person. I've always led like a person. Sometimes I've made mistakes in doing it, but I think that the personality that I bring to the role sort of cascades through the marketing team and the company culture in some regard, and that's definitely reflected in the marketing that we do. There are things that I've been on the fence about, and we've pushed forward full steam ahead. So I think that's one. The other is that I've worked very closely with our chief people officer and our CEO on when we speak out. Because, even though we're only a 600-person company, we are one of the 200 most popular websites in the world. And so when we put out a policy position or a statement, people certainly pay attention to it. And as you said, there's so much going on right now that you can't weigh in on everything, and it would be irresponsible to do so. And so, the approach that we sort of take is there a critical mass of employees, community members, and or customers who are impacted by this issue? And does us speaking about it, putting out a statement, have some sort of impact? And so we look at everything through that lens. I think we've often made the right decision when it came to where to speak out or a policy to release. But no one is perfect. No company is perfect. So we try to sort of take things through that lens. We're not always first to speak out, and we're maybe not always speaking out when others are. But I feel at the end of the day pretty good about what we've done there.
That's a great way to end, that we always try our best, and it's an evolving situation. So what we put out there, what we put out there is what we try to do and what we try to do our best at. I think we're at the end of this pretty amazing conversation, and would love to open it up to a few questions.
I think there are 2 things most specifically. One, I think the most mundane task that marketers do, whether it's like 60 variations of a tweet for a go-to-market launch of a new product, goes away. And, we can trust AI to do what we were doing well. So I think that's one. I think the other is that it solves some of the problems that marketers have struggled with for many, many years, like attribution, for example. At the end of the day, marketing attribution has never been perfect, and multi-touch doesn't really work, even though there are thousands of SaaS tools that purport to fix it. And so, does AI ML give us the ability to have more sophisticated attribution to a campaign, to better fully understand dollar in, dollar out, and to report out on that? So, I think that experimentation and other things, AI can be an incredibly powerful tool. In addition to just making marketers work on more interesting things, more creative things. Because I think the other thing that we haven't said yet is that, AI can pass the LSAT, it can complete the MCAT, it can get into Harvard or, whatever else superlative out there. But where it struggles is AP English, writing a compelling essay, getting really creative, telling more than like 2 jokes about the same topic. And that's what marketers do quite well. And I think that sort of creative and human element can't be replaced, at least not yet. The challenge at Stack Overflow is not unlike a lot of companies have, like Disney, like we just heard about, like Walmart and many others, and that's that we have 3 pretty disparate lines of business, which I didn't talk about. So we have a public platform, our massive website, which is sort of the hub, that we build everything on top of, and then we have our fastest growing business, which is a SaaS product called Stack Overflow for Teams, which is a private instance that companies use, like banks for their cloud migration, for example, and then an advertising product. And so because those products are quite different, the personas are different. We sell one to marketers, we sell the other to technologists. One is a SaaS business, so it often takes like 20 to 30 touches before it converts, as opposed to 2 to 3. The CAC is wildly different, the channels, the campaigns, and resource distribution is really, really challenging, especially in an environment like this, where we're sort of jerked around back and forth by the market. And I think it's really difficult to develop a strategy. So, for example, 2 years ago or 18 months ago, every company was talking about growth at all costs, especially when it came to SaaS. Invest as much as you can in the product, market it like crazy. We saw blockchain companies where these really, really huge conferences, and now everyone's focused on profitability. And so an advertising business, while profitable, isn't driving the same valuation as a SaaS business. So should I be investing more in SaaS or more in advertising? How can I take a single headcount and get them to work across both, and even though it requires different skill sets? And I think, at the end of the day, the thing that keeps me up at night is that we're moving into an environment that's increasingly resource constrained and being asked to do more. And I think every marketing team is experiencing that right now, and there are no easy answers or solutions. I think some folks are saying, okay, lean into offshoring, lean into AI, ML, but none of these things are silver bullets, and it puts marketers in a pretty untenable position.